Welcome to Colonial Outcasts. Here we are returning after a brief week-long hiatus after I got COVID and everyone was burned out from the Washington, D.C. protest. We're going to do an episode on that, political violence and the upcoming Democratic National Convention on August 19th, which the cops in Chicago have been reversing Roman legion style shield wall tactics for, because we are showing up in force for that. So we covered the Wednesday, July 24th Netanyahu congressional speech, and we're going to cover the DNC with Kamala Harris when she gets anointed as the queen of the Democratic Party. So it's myself today, Mark Wayne, and Alina Xenofontos talking about the insane news cycle over the past few days. We are recording and releasing this episode at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Wednesday, July 31st. This is a developing story, and there is a lot of information that nobody has. All I can say is that our analysis and reporting will be better than NPR's. Let's go. We're talking about targeted assassinations, escalations, and what really happened with Ismail Haniyeh. So we're also on Patreon. I'll be doing a live Q&A on there right after this, a little after 12 p.m. EST. Anyways, that's the plug for that. So why are we here, y'all? Ismail Haniyeh, the political chief of Hamas, was assassinated in Tehran. Hamas and Iran's foreign ministry announced Wednesday morning. This marks a significant escalation in the Middle East conflict, potentially, though I'm personally not convinced, even though Iran has vowed a, quote, harsh and painful response in retaliation. So Haniyeh's murder in Iran came only hours after Israeli forces said they had killed a senior Hezbollah commander, Fuad Shukr, in a strike in Beirut. In retaliation, they said, for an attack on the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights in Syria on Saturday, which struck a football pitch, killing 12 children and youth from the Druze community. So I just want to say that the community says that the rocket came from the Israeli territory, by the way, but you would never expect Western media to report on what people are actually saying on the ground. Just a side note. So anyways, the Hezbollah commander Fuad Shukr is believed to be a senior advisor to the Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, his military right-hand man, so to speak, the U.S. has previously said. And the U.S. State Department or Department of Treasury has been offering $5 million in reward for information about him, alleging he also played a central role in the 1983 bombing of a U.S. Marine barracks in Beirut, which killed 241 U.S. military personnel. Anyways, whether he was or was not, I can't confirm that. So anyways, as of right now, Fuad Shukr is not confirmed dead, but he was probably, since they're still sifting through the rubble, and he was reportedly in the building when the attack happened. We'll see. So within the same day, we have a senior Hezbollah official and Ismail Haniyeh, head of Hamas's political wing, which is currently engaged in ceasefire negotiations with Israel, being killed through targeted political assassinations. So in a statement, Hamas said its leader was killed in a, quote, treacherous Zionist raid on his residence in Tehran and vowed revenge. So it's important to note that Israel has not claimed responsibility for the attack, although they rarely do ever claim responsibility. Mm-hmm. So Haniyeh, who was one of Hamas's top leaders for nearly 2 decades, was in Iran for the inauguration of the country's new president, Pezeshkian. I think I'm mispronouncing that. I don't know why. Sometimes I struggle with last names. So Iranian state media has said that Haniyeh died when a rocket struck a facility for veterans in northern Tehran. It was also supposed to be an IRGC, Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps compound, and they were running security for the building itself. So now there's actually a ton going on here. First things, we have to acknowledge the massive security failure that happened both in Lebanon and Iran. First, Shukr was kind of a ghost, off-the-grid type guy because of Israel's long history of assassinations. In fact, one of the only pictures we have of him is this grainy wanted photo that Israel's main account posted on X. I'm just going to pull it up for you guys just to kind of share the lack of up-to-date biometric information we have on this guy. So, yeah, you can see that this is from the State Department information that brings to justice Fuad Shakur up to $5 million reward. And this was apparently, according to the U.S. government, the most up-to-date photo they currently had at the time. It's grainy. You can't even make out his face. So I just wanted to show you that to kind of highlight the security failure that happened. So I guess what I would want to say is, like, now that Haniyeh was assassinated in the IRGC protection, one of the big Hezbollah guys was also taken out. It's also troubling. But before we get into all of that, here is just an off-the-cuff prediction I made last night on X, formerly Twitter. I said the assassination of Haniyeh in Tehran won't lead to a major regional escalation. Iran doesn't want a wider war, and the U.S. is not in a position to fight one. But, and Israel can't essentially kill its way out of the situation. The project, like all colonial projects, achieves unprecedented violence before the fall. The entire axis of resistance is bigger than any one leader, and the importance of this will be overstated by Israel and the Western media establishment. So the assassinations of such leaders in Iran and Lebanon are historically and effectually only PR stunts. There's little evidence that they degrade capabilities or sow confusion in the ranks for any appreciable amount of time. This PR stunt / assassination will likely have more blowback than usual. A targeted political assassination by Israel in sovereign Iranian territory while they were actively engaged in ceasefire negotiations with Hamas's political wing led by Haniyeh might have some unforeseen consequences. So do I think it's going to lead to war? I mean, that's kind of like what everyone's going to want to talk about with the clickbait headlines that will inevitably come out of this. But that was just my read based on the information at hand right now. And I thought we'd have kind of like a free-form discussion about all of this. The overriding question is still like, will this lead to a wider war? How did this happen? I don't know. What are your thoughts, Alina?
So there's a lot of things to unpack here. So for me, first of all, it's how bizarre the assassination actually is, as in the way the information has come out. Usually up until this point, we would see some sort of major explosion, and then people are speculating, and then there'll be an announcement from the Iranian state saying, oh, this compound was hit, etc. But in this particular instance, it was just at some point in the middle of the night, the Iranians basically declared that Ismail Haniyeh has been assassinated. We have no more information outside of that apparently there was some sort of raid or drone strike that was so particular it hit his bedroom, killed him, killed his bodyguard. We don't have any video footage. We don't have any photographic evidence of what's happened, which is incredibly bizarre as well. We don't really have a list of any other casualties, or even if there were any other casualties, which to me also seems somewhat questionable. And then, of course, the huge security breach. There was one outside of those two.
No, his bodyguard was.
Yeah, the bodyguard. Yeah. So So outside of Ismail Haniyeh and his bodyguard, there were apparently no other casualties, which I find to be very, very peculiar, to say the least. And again, this happened within an IRGC compound. So to me, the idea that a long-range target missile, and I'll let you say your piece, hit this particular compound, only killed those two, no evidence of it. It just seems somewhat, well, not realistic. Yeah.
Fishy. Well, if you take the strike in Lebanon against the Hezbollah commander, there was a lot of collateral damage. We're seeing reports come out that says 3 civilians were killed, 2 of them children, 74 injured. You would expect to see similar numbers like that. And I just wanted to bring up one point about this like super precise missile. Al Mayadeen, the Lebanese outlet, was reporting that it came from abroad. I don't know how they know that. But I just wanted to pull up a map. Okay, that's Tehran. The closest place a strike would come from abroad would be Azerbaijan. Obviously, there's no reason to think it would come from Turkmenistan, that massive police state.
Yeah,
that
I
would be
don't think it.
really hard to operate from. So look, we're looking at like at least 100, maybe like I haven't measured it out, but 200 miles. The most precise like missile that has that small of a warhead to only kill 2 people within a certain room is kind of like the workhorse of the precision arsenal that the United States has, and that's like a Hellfire missile, which Israel also uses. The max operational range on one of those, the unclassed operational range, is 11 kilometers. So how is that coming from abroad? 200 miles through air defense, and radar systems. It's just really not adding up in the context of all of this.
I think the context you could look at this through that would offer more clarity, in my opinion, would be the assassination of the nuclear scientist who was killed on the road coming back from his vacation home. I don't know if you remember, a few years back, they put a robot machine gun on the back of a truck that was, I guess, controlled by AI, and they were able to target him at an intersection. Very precise. I believe it did even kill the passenger. So, and me and Greg were talking about this before we went live, is that Iran has a lot of Israeli spies. Israel, it's filled to the brim with Israeli spies. As we know, many, I don't know the percentage, I'm not saying all, or even half, but there are a large percentage of Iranian citizens who do support Israel simply because they hate the regime so much. So simply by default, they hate Israel. Now, that's a very fertile territory for collaboration with Israeli intelligence. He would have been safer in Gaza in the tunnels than you would be in Iran. Iran is not a safe place even for people who Iran is friendly to, simply because it's so littered with Israeli espionage, assets on the ground. So given that they were able to assassinate a nuclear scientist on a road with a robot machine gun on the back of a pickup truck, it's not that hard to fathom that inside Iran, there were assets on the ground offering some type of intel for a drone, a small drone. I'm not even talking about a big, a Predator drone. I'm talking about like that big, flying right into the window and exploding. We don't know all the details. I'm speculating here, but I'm just saying there's a gazillion possibilities of assassination attempts in Iran that don't have to be, large footprint type of explosions. So, it's not too, for me, it's not too hard to fathom how this might have gone down. There's a million ways it could have been done, especially given the fact that Iran is just it's Swiss cheese. It's very has a lot of holes, put it that way, as far as security.
Well, I think one of the sorry, just real quick, speaking of the weapon system, it's more believable to me that if he was killed in this compound, it comes from some sort of local collaboration that had some inside information. They fired either a drone or some sort of surface to surface air missile that was laser guided by a spotter, just kind of lasering in, which window, which room he was in. And that seems to make the most sense to me. But then again, then it coming from abroad, passing 200 miles over Iranian airspace, that really doesn't make sense. But also, it's impossible to say because we don't have battle damaged photos, so I can't analyze what kind of munition was used to kill him. It's actually bizarre. With other assassinations, it's been really kind of above board. You kind of see what's happened. The circumstances are strange, and because they're so strange, you're getting conspiracy theories like, oh, this is the attempt on the first day of his inauguration. This is the new president's attempt to normalize relations with Israel and the West. So that's just popping up because of the weird, bizarre circumstances surrounding this.
What I was going to say is I completely agree. To me, this looks like it was a job done from within Iran with probably some local allegiances or even Mossad agents, which, as Mark very rightfully stated, are quite ubiquitous throughout Iran. This is just the way things unfortunately work. There's a lot of loopholes within Iran. My question is, why is the Iranian establishment not stating as such? Because at this point, if they're trying to preserve the deterrence policy or their security, that's already been breached, because the very fact that Ismail Haniyeh has been killed within that particular compound in of itself undermines Iranian security. So I do not understand what the point is, at least from my perspective. I would like to hear what you guys think. Why they don't just state otherwise.
Because I think it has to do with the same reason the FBI in the United States would not give all the details if there was, say, like an assassination attempt here, because they might be doing an investigation. They're playing dumb, like as if they don't know a lot of it. The more information they give to the public, that gives the collaborators a heads up on what they know. So if I had to make a guess or speculate, I would say the reason why they're not coming out with it is because they have their own form of an FBI. They're going to be investigating who might have been collaborating, and they're going to tell the public, oh, we don't know a lot. We don't have all the details. Therefore keeping the collaborators in the dark about what they know. It's just the same thing the FBI would do here, in my opinion. So not too perplexing for me.
I mean, it's also not, I mean, that is a point. Yeah. But it's also, everybody like needs to get on message, right? Like every member of the government, they're having a Security Council meeting right now that involves the Ayatollah, senior officials, and because there have been a couple of messages that have not been completely on message. Like, first of all, they according to a Politico article, the Ayatollah said there will be a strong response. And then the vice president was saying, this will not escalate us essentially into a larger regional war. So that they're not presenting a thing that's completely on message. So until they do, I would keep silent on the details. Also, this is they're in a tricky position, like how to restore deterrence capacity. If it was a Mossad attack, which, it's very reasonable to assume. So like and you don't want to make use miscalculated diplomatic language. You want to take some time to figure out how to calibrate this properly to restore deterrence, and also to not escalate this into a wider regional conflict, which we've seen since October. Iran doesn't want. The United States also doesn't want it. So how do you do that? That's the main question. And I honestly don't expect them to determine that anytime soon. I can't think about how to do it. This is a real pickle that they're in right now. And I would just like to highlight that. It's like, how do you restore deterrence without blowing up the entire region?
I mean, I think the best they can guess is Well, I was just going to say real quick, I think one of the best, the biggest hope you have is trying to have some fruits of your labor with the investigation and find out who's responsible. And the best way you can save face is say, hey, we caught the collaborators. They were working with Israel and they're arrested now. That would be a great way of saving face and showing deterrence, or showing your capabilities by actually making some arrests of same thing as it would be in the United States. Like, there was an assassination here, they would be on, the FBI would be trying to find out who did it. It's just for the simple political optics of it, of finding out who's responsible. So, I mean, but go ahead. Sorry.
No, but I completely agree. This makes a lot of sense. My question is, and I just would like for you guys to clarify for this in case I've personally missed anything. Isn't it the sort of the official narrative that's coming out of Iran is that they're stating that it was a sort of out of country missile attack? That's sort of the information that they're coming out with, rather than actually keeping quiet about it and saying, this is to be investigated. We're going to see what happened. This is also why I'm confused about it, because they're making again, I might be wrong, but from what I've seen, they're making those sort of assertions, or they're sort of leaking that kind of knowledge out from their own media outlets, which is what I find most confusing, rather than stating, we're going to carry out an investigation and see where this is going to go. And from that point, I was going to make another point afterwards, but I just want to hear what you guys, I mean, if there's something that I've missed, isn't that the information that's currently coming out right now from Iran?
Okay, so let me. So the latest article from Press TV, which, if you guys are,
Mhm.
if the audience is not familiar with Press TV, it's the Iranian English language international news station. It's affiliated with the actual state, but it's definitely worth following regularly. So, um, okay, so what they're saying right now is the IRGC has warned Israel. This was from a few hours ago, warned Israel of a harsh and stinging response from the forces of the Axis of Resistance, not from Iran, but necessarily, but they're keeping their proxies in play, particularly Iran, in retaliation for the assassination of a Hamas leader, Haniyeh. So, quote, undoubtedly, this is their official statement, the heinous crime committed by the Zionist regime concerning the killing of Ismail Haniyeh, chief of the political bureau of the Palestinian Islamic Resistance Movement, Hamas, will be met with a harsh and painful response from the powerful resistance front, again, proxies, especially the Islamic Republic of Iran, the elite force said in a statement released earlier today. Nothing beyond that. Let me see. I'm scanning, and I can pull up the article right now, actually. That might be helpful. I'm
And
really
also,
not
when it
seeing
comes to the
about
United
anything.
States,
Yeah, I'm not
I
seeing
also do
about
find it
anything about
interesting
how it
that.
was purchased. Go ahead. Sorry.
Sorry. No, because my second point was as well addressing the United States, because we're saying they don't want a regional war, which from a common sense perspective, yes, they wouldn't want a regional war. But everything that happened within the last 12 hours. So we had the essentially missile attacks in Beirut, which was a big red line for Hezbollah from the very beginning. And we remember Nasrallah just a few months ago stating that if Israel was to ever target Beirut, that they will retaliate in equal sort of strength. So it's a very powerful statement that now Hezbollah is going to have to sort of stand behind. But then as well, on top of the killing of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, which is also surrounded by a lot of question marks, we also have the US did strike Iranian proxies or militias within Iraq at the same time. So this is all very well coordinated, and it all happened within the space of 12 hours. So I do think, obviously, the United States administration or the deep state, the people anyway behind the scenes, were to some extent aware and I think approved this operation. That is my perspective, because just by the fact that they also were engaging in similar activities within the same time frame, and this is provocation. So it really begs the question of what exactly were they trying to achieve in doing this, other than to provoke. So going back to the former argument and sort of etiological processing, we've often argued that the United States doesn't want an escalation, but then they participated to a certain extent in an attack on the axis of resistance in the region.
Right. So about that, I would just say that Netanyahu's visit may have been part of this. You know, he spent his entire address to Congress basically priming the narrative for an attack on Iran, and what was ever happening behind closed doors during security meetings with, you know, Lloyd Austin or Blinken or whatever other U.S. State Department officials he was talking to. He was probably laid out his idea for his plans for Iran, and he must have had some tacit consent. So what you're seeing right now is they strike the Hezbollah commander, and then behind the scenes politically right now, the U.S. is urging Hezbollah not to respond or retaliate or escalate. The U.S. has also been trying to pressure the Lebanese government to get Hezbollah to stand down. So it just seems to me, my read is the U.S. is kind of allowing this kind of loose leash, this kind of free hand with targeted political assassinations, while urging restraint from the people that were attacked, because I still don't think they want an escalation. First of all, a report by The Economist, which usually is a big cheerleader for U.S. and Western military power, just straight up said that according to internal reporting by the United States government and the Department of Defense, the United States is not ready for a major power conflict right now. So it's like, these are things like we know. So it just seems like maybe they're allowing Israel to kind of reestablish an idea of their intelligence deterrence that was lost on October 7th by kind of using these like fancy targeting methods and killing high profile people. Because if you look at Israeli Twitter or the Hezbollah X propaganda,
they're celebrating.
You're celebrating it. It's kind of like you're seeing this euphoria where I've seen tons of comments along the lines of, "Oh, the Mossad, Shin Bet, the IDF, they have redeemed themselves for October 7th." So this is part of their.
Yeah, this is where I'm conflicted. That was kind of my first knee-jerk response to all this, was that I think this is Israel. It's a symbolic victory for Israel to help morale in the country, because morale in Israel is deteriorating so bad, with them getting their asses kicked by Hamas so bad, and the PTSD from soldiers, their lack of accomplishing any of the goals that they had going into Gaza. So seeing that morale just take a big nosedive in Israeli society, they needed some type of victory to show the Israelis, hey, we're still the badass operators around the world. We got this shit under control. I think that's what that was. I think it's a symbolic victory for Israeli citizens, if I had to guess. But I'm conflicted, because at the same time, like you said, Milikowski's speech in DC was basically all about trying to get us into a war with Iran, just like he did with Iraq, just like back in Iraq. It was almost the identical speech he was giving. Like, if you take the speech he gave about why we need to go and remove Saddam Hussein, and you take the speech that he did in Washington, D.C. about why we should be going to war with Iran, it has all the similar elements. The axis of terror instead of the axis of evil. I mean, like that Bush, that was the Bush's famous phrase. So I think that's where I'm conflicted. Is this all part of the narrative building up to a war with Iran, which Israel wants and trying to drag us into, like, which was basically the whole point of Milikowski's freaking address to Congress? Or is it all just a symbolic victory for the sake of distracting from the riots on behalf of allowing rape in Israel? Or is it boosting morale because of all their losses? So
Yeah. I mean, okay, so I think it can be both, right? It can be a number of
things. It could be both. Yeah.
Okay, but these operations took longer to plan. I mean, like they've been collecting on these guys and trying to find out where these guys are for a long time. Obviously, Ismail Haniyeh is not like a hidden figure like a Hezbollah military commander is, but he has been in Qatar for a long time,
and they were waiting for him to leave Qatar. They were just waiting for it to happen, and they knew that the inauguration of the Iranian president was coming, so they would have had their operatives in play already before he landed. Yeah, no, I get it. So it could have been long planned in advance, obviously.
You're right, and because just in case you guys aren't tracking, Qatar is neutral ground. It served as the neutral ground. It served as neutral ground between warring parties for a long time. For example, during the unfortunately named global war on terror, the Taliban had safe haven, and they had their own diplomatic staff in Qatar to have ongoing conversations with the Central Intelligence Agency and other security actors that were involved in the war in Afghanistan, for instance. So yes, Qatar is neutral ground. You can't target anybody there. That's generally well established and known. And yeah, so they had to wait. This was a public event that was happening. This wasn't like some security meeting between Haniyeh and Iran. The IRGC stated, this is again according to Press TV, that the late Hamas chief was among the distinguished personalities of about 110 foreign delegations who had been invited by the Iranian parliament to attend the inauguration ceremony of Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian. So they would have known about this in advance. They would have been able to put pieces in play. This doesn't seem to me like this was necessarily going to be, just because the complexity of the operation, that this was something that was like spur of the moment. There was probably a contingency in place for the targeted assassination of Haniyeh. And when the certain operational requirements were met, they're just like, yep, green light. And they authorized the operation. So yeah, and it can also be a PR move as well, because they usually are. If you look at all these Hezbollah accounts, what they're posting is like, no matter our political divisions, all Israelis unite behind the death of our enemies. Like I've seen that variations of that post like 100 times. So yeah, go ahead, Alina.
This is the thing for me, though. It's such a redundant move to make for multiple reasons, right? Even if you've done it for PR and in order to sort of boost the morale of the Israeli population, again, it's so futile and so superficial in the context of it's not going to change anything on the ground, right? It's not going to change anything as to what's happening right now in the north of Israel, nor in what's happening in Gaza, or the fact that their military is depleted, or the fact that they're having internal strife within their own military and the military commanders. I mean, it was just a matter of 3 weeks ago when there was a New York Times article where essentially senior Israeli military officials were stating that for them, a ceasefire is of utmost importance because they cannot sustain a war against Hezbollah. And the last thing that they want right now is for an extended war and to open a new front with Hezbollah in full. The military is depleted. They are low on munitions. So I really don't understand. I mean, it's not really going to change anything. The war in Gaza is going to continue. More of their soldiers are going to be coming back wounded. There's tens of thousands of them apparently, like who are missing limbs, who won't even be able to go back into combat. They have a shortage of manpower to the point that they're essentially called now the ultra-Orthodox Jews to, I don't know, I guess fight Hezbollah or fight in Gaza. It's absolutely demoralizing, and their economy is in shambles. And I think people are very well aware of it, not to mention the internal frustration that exists still with regards to the hostages. And now I think, if anything, it's going to agitate people. I think Israelis, especially the ones that are calling for an immediate ceasefire and a hostage deal, because this has effectively put the hostage, any sort of hostage ceasefire deal between Hamas and Israel at a halt. Not to mention that 4 days ago, just 4 days ago, I think Israel had basically placed another new 4 conditions on Hamas in terms of actually reaching a ceasefire deal, which the conditions themselves were basically innately stating that we're not going to go forward with a ceasefire because the conditions would just be unacceptable to Hamas, and they know it. Those conditions, just for in case the audience doesn't know, was essentially that if the first phase of the ceasefire, after the first stage of the ceasefire, there is no sort of agreement between the two sides, they're not going to continue until agreement is made that Israel has a right to continue its operations. They basically said that they refuse to withdraw completely from Gaza, that they're going to remain within specific locations in Gaza, and they now want complete control over the the Philadelphia crossing. So this was completely unacceptable to the Palestinians and obviously to Hamas and all the resistance factions. And these were conditions that were imposed 4 days ago. And actually Hamas had made an official statement at that point saying, see, Israel does not want a resolution because every time we come close to something that is acceptable for both sides, they consistently put new conditions because they're constantly prolonging the situation, which then agitated, and rightfully so, a lot of other Israeli citizens who want this to come to an end and who apprehend that it won't come to an end with the kind of conditions that Israel's putting forward. So now they've gone ahead and also killed the Hamas commander, which isn't going to change anything. It's completely ridiculous. And I'll just say this one last thing. I do believe that this actually does impose a risk factor in Israel. I think I might be the outsider here, but I do feel that particularly Hezbollah, more so than anything else at this point, they will have to establish the deterrence policy. They have just hit Beirut. They have killed and injured almost 100 people in total at the heart of Beirut. This has created a lot of sort of distress among the Lebanese population. They need to, what Israel's also trying to do is change the rules of engagement right now, and Hezbollah needs to calm that down while setting their boundaries. And I think the same thing has to go for Iran because this happened in their territory, and I think a lot of Iranians are questioning what happened in their territory. And that's why I think that Israel's done all this. It's a PR, stunt to, like an ostentatious aesthetic victory, but
I think it's going to shoot them in the foot. It's
actually going to cause much more harm.
Yeah,
that's my personal evaluation.
But it's also galvanizing the attack on Beirut is galvanizing the Lebanese population for retaliation against Israel. That's what like they think that this is going to intimidate the population. When you notice the comments said on the ground as reporters were in Lebanon near the site of the attack, you notice the spirit amongst and the zeitgeist amongst the Lebanese people is that they're motivated now. Like, this was an attack on them. It's not like they're saying, oh, okay, we'll try to keep Hezbollah under control and we're going to secede to Israel. No, it was a galvanized anger that's going to unite the country, in my opinion. Even the Christians and the Muslim groups, militia groups with it, or resistance groups within Lebanon, I believe it's just going to galvanize them further. So Israel's
we did see that video from Daya right after the strike, where that Sky News reporter was referred to Hezbollah as a militia, and she was stopped by some guy on the street. He's like, "It's not a militia. All right, they're freedom fighters." Yep. Yeah. So the one thing that we do have to acknowledge is that a precedent was set the last time there was a targeted assassination happening in Beirut when they targeted the Hamas official Salah al-Aruri in December. Hezbollah did make a response. It was still measured and still within their rules of engagement. It wasn't an escalated response. So is this time different because it was a really senior Hezbollah commander and there was a lot, unlike the targeted assassination of al-Aruri, the Hamas official, late last year, there was a lot of collateral damage on this one. 74 injured. Like, that's some pretty big ordnance that they're dropping. That's not, again, I mentioned Hellfire missiles that were meant to only kill like 1 or 2 people. No, that's a big bomb. So,
right in the heart of Lebanon, right in Beirut.
So
it's very symbolic. It was a symbolic attack. Besides the fact of killing a senior Hezbollah official, officer, or in their command structure, it's also just symbolic against the Lebanese people that we can penetrate deep inside your country if you allow Hezbollah to attack Israel. The effect is not going to go the way Israel is expecting it, though. It's going to galvanize because look, Lebanon has, they've been ravaged by war. I mean, their economy is doing terrible. The people are angry. They're upset by what Western powers have done to their country. They're not blaming each other. They're blaming the outside world. So an attack further on them is just going to galvanize.
Oh, yeah. And of course, the fact that Oh, what do you think?
Oh, sorry. I think I'm lagging. That's why. Please continue. Please continue.
Oh,
I think I'm lagging. That's why.
Yeah. The thing is, though, they also have to know that's an interesting point about the economy. What's going to be the first thing that goes if this really opens up? It's going to be the international airport in Beirut. You can actually, it's really easy to determine Israeli targeting priorities and target sets by their information operations. Because what did they do a few weeks ago? They had this whole media push. They spent like 2 whole news cycles on it about how Hezbollah was hiding weapons caches in Beirut at the airport. It's like, okay, well, I guess
that's what they did in Gaza. They want to blow up all the hospitals. They say that Hamas is under the hospitals. They want to attack a refugee camp in tents. They'll say that there's a Hamas official amongst the refugees. That's all you got to do. All you got to do is just say, oh, there's a bad guy that we really need to kill that's in the middle of the civilians, and you attack it.
No,
that's their narrative.
But all I wanted to say was, like, that's why it's so easy to determine their target priorities and target.
So you're saying that they're going to attack the airport as the first line of defense, and Well, how does that relate to the civilian population and economy? Go ahead.
Well, first of all, because there goes the tourist industry. There goes, taking out the only international airport in the country is going to be devastating. That's just one of the things. But their entire strategy and their entire deterrence against Hezbollah opening up a front is the collective punishment of the civilians, is the destroying of civilian infrastructure. Netanyahu said earlier this year that if Hezbollah opens up a second front, they will, quote, turn Beirut into Gaza. First of all, they don't have the amount of ordnance stockpiles to turn Beirut into Gaza, but that doesn't mean they can still not cause a lot of ton of damage in southern Lebanon, in the Bekaa Valley, in Beirut. But so that is a major consideration that Hezbollah needs to take into account, because they're not just as the Sky News reporter incorrectly said, a militia. They are a political entity with a generally a good reputation for good governance. Therefore, yes, they may be part of the axis of the resistance. They may support Hamas militarily and engage in escalation management, but their first priority is southern Lebanon.
Yeah.
So of course
they have a responsibility to their population, and yeah, I understand. And honestly, they've shown a lot of restraint when you really consider it. Hezbollah has shown a lot of discipline out of all this.
Well, I mean, they have to, because we know what Israel's going to do. They're just going to bomb everything and trust in United States political cover. So this is why I'm not. This is why I'm not sure it's going to escalate. And I think Alina wants to say something here.
The only thing that concerns me is I think the kind of information that I'm getting coming out of Lebanon, including some of my friends and my contacts, obviously, just I'm constantly speaking with them and trying to hear what people are feeling in Lebanon. And it is initially the reports that I was getting was that there was a lot of frustration, agitation. Of course, they understand that Israel is a belligerent actor that they are wary of, but there was a frustration with the way that Hezbollah is operating. I have actually heard these kind of sort of complaints, as they coming out of Lebanon, not necessarily going against Hezbollah, but actually in the way that it's operating. And so what concerns me, although today apparently it's calmed down in comparison to yesterday, what concerns me is that if these sort of attacks continue, what this will do to the population of Lebanon. Now, Mark said that this will actually unite the Lebanese population, which I think is most likely the case, but it does concern me that there will be factions that who already have certain issues, let's just say, with Hezbollah in general within Lebanon, that will capitalize on this. And I remember reading from some of the investigative reports by Declassified UK just a couple of weeks ago, where they were basically stating that there were flights made from Rafah Akrotiri here in Cyprus, the British bases, to Lebanon. There were secret flights, although they managed to record at least, I think they said around 80 flights to Lebanon from Cyprus. And the idea, or what was proposed through that article, was that actually there was a transfer of weaponry, possibly to groups that could counter Hezbollah. And I think this is important, and we have to make sure that, we bring this into the conversation. It's because Israel cannot defeat Hezbollah. There's no way. They don't have the military capabilities to do so. And much like Greg said, and you stated as well, that's why collective punishment is the way that they approach it, in order to terrorize the Lebanese people and undermine Hezbollah internally. But what also concerns me is that because they can't outright defeat Hezbollah, that they're going to try to instigate some sort of internalized conflict and capitalize even on minority groups within Lebanon, so that they can then delegitimize Hezbollah or create internal strife that could weaken Hezbollah from within. And this is something that, obviously divide and rule. It's one of the basic modus operandi of imperialism, particularly Western imperialism, and Israel, especially as we know what they've done as well to Palestine in the same context. And I think that's one of the things that concerns me as well going forward. I lean towards what Mark said as well. I think that the people of Lebanon understand what Israel is and what it means to them. But because there are also factions within Lebanon that do have some ideological issues with Hezbollah, that they might become some sort of ally. That's just something to note.
Right, and I do think that's obviously what they're going for. I mean, that's just straight out of the colonialism handbook, and of course, Israel's like notorious for it. However, sparking an internalized conflict that would be enough to destabilize Hezbollah's like warfighting capabilities against Israel, that's not something that happens overnight either. Right. They're not just going to be able to like flick a switch and have a civil war just pop up. So, I mean, I do think they are like cultivating the possibility, and they've probably been doing it for a long time. There's nothing that the Western governments love more than a good old regime change or a political shift. But I don't think it's enough to like really tip the scales. Just the way that taking out Ismail Haniyeh is going to make any significant change going forward either. So yeah, I mean, it's something I would definitely take into consideration, but I am still betting on not a crazy escalation, because again, I think there's a lot of other players in the mix too. Like, bringing in Iran has potentially huge devastating consequences. I think we should take it seriously when, like, the Russian foreign minister Lavrov says that any war with Iran would bring in global powers into the mix. Like, if we're not prepared for a conflict with Iran, like, what would happen if China or Russia, who are solidifying
Exactly.
diplomatic ties, security ties with Iran into it?
But that's why I think they're going to use the proxies. That's why I'm personally focusing more on Hezbollah and also Ansar Allah as well. That's because we also had the exchanges between Ansar Allah and Israel. And Ansar Allah has already stated that they will be retaliating for the attacks on the port in Sana'a. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what's going to happen in the next upcoming days, because as well, from the Axis's perspective and from Iran's perspective, they'll probably act from within the Axis. They need to establish again their boundaries. They need to establish the deterrence policy. And that's why I do think that something is going to happen. But obviously it's going to happen within reason to not escalate, but they also need to set the record, let's just say, straight with Israel right now. And we've already seen that Hezbollah and Ansar Allah have the capabilities to bypass Israeli defense even in Tel Aviv. We've already seen that. And Haifa. So I don't know. This is again purely speculative, what the outcome will be. But I'm personally of the opinion that there is going to be retaliation from the Axis, and it's going to be a collective retaliation. It's not going to be one to dramatically escalate, but it's going to be one to set the Israelis straight. And it automatically, I feel, undermine their so-called momentary victory of killing Haniyeh. And also I just want to say, the Hezbollah commander that we don't officially, and this is the other thing, we still don't know if he was killed or not, but that he was in the building that was targeted. He was actually apparently not just Nasrallah's right-hand man, but he was actually leading apparently the unit. There was a name of the unit now, which I can't remember, that was specifically dealing with Israel. So obviously, this is big for Hezbollah as well, and that's why I really do believe they will do something. I just don't know. I'm not obviously a military expert. I don't know how they would approach it, but they need to. Yeah.
Well, there are a few
reorganize.
assumptions reorganize, but whatever the response is going to be, it's not going to happen tomorrow. If you guys can recall the precedents that were set after 3 U.S. soldiers were killed at an air base in Jordan, potentially Syria, probably Syria. The U.S. response took over a week. After the Iranian consulate was hit in Damascus, the Iranian response took many days to organize and put in place. Because when these things are happening, people need to understand that there is a lot of back channel diplomatic ties. Like, even if you're at war with someone, your security people are talking to their security people to try to manage the scale of the conflict. So a response isn't going to happen overnight. That's just one thing to keep in mind going forward.
Well, Alina, I want to dive back into what you were saying about the flights going from Cyprus to Beirut, that 80 flights. So that's very interesting to me, because it is something that I do want to have a dedicated episode on, is the factions within Lebanon. As we know, in the past, Israel tried to use the Maronite as a proxy, collaborator faction within Lebanon to try and sow division. But you and I had this discussion offline one time where I'm getting the impression that the Maronite Christian groups and the different Christian factions within Lebanon and the Islamic factions within Lebanon, they're starting to unite. There are Christians joining Hezbollah by the thousands, from what I've gathered, and that's very telling. That's very telling on where the social winds are blowing right now within Lebanon. Like Greg said, it's in the colonial playbook to divide and conquer. That's not working anymore. That did work decades ago, but now everything's changing. So, like you guys were saying, like Hezbollah's number one responsibility are the Lebanese people. Okay, so by showing restraint and by showing discipline and not responding right away to Israel's attacks, it really starts to make the people respect Hezbollah more and more, even the factions that did not support Hezbollah, by not escalating and just showing discipline. Taking punches on the chin after punch on the chin shows who's the aggressor, who's putting who in harm's way. By Hezbollah not responding right away, it's showing the Lebanese people, hey, look, we're responsible to you. We're not going to retaliate and try to poke to try to escalate this for the sake of your lives. But if it keeps on happening, it obviously it shows the Lebanese people that the ones responsible for them are truly being responsible. The question is, here's the $1 billion question: at what point will it actually trigger a response? What is the straw that will break the camel's back in all this? That will trigger a regional event, a regional conflict. What is it? Like, we keep talking about these. It seems like they're flirting with it. They're flirting with war and regional conflict, but it's like these little attacks here and there. It's all a dance. So at what point does it start being a dance and they get down to business?
There's an element of this where they're looking for a casus belli, a reason to go to war, to launch an invasion. At least some factions within the Israeli government, they thought they were going to get it in occupied Syria. They really, Smotrich went to the funeral of the 12 Druze children and teenagers that were killed. They got booed out of there. They had to leave. They tried to manufacture a bunch of atrocity propaganda off that. It didn't work. They're going to try to find something else to do it. But that's just one point to take into consideration. Go ahead, Alina. Sorry.
Honestly, my personal opinion is that anyone anyway, wants to be the first one to pull the trigger specifically for an all-out full-blown war, because none of them can actually afford to do so. I mean, even when we spoke about Lebanon, I mean, beyond obviously, their colonial past, Lebanon is a deeply problematic country in terms of their economy. I mean, they're heavily indebted to the World Bank, heavily indebted to the IMF, who essentially have complete authority over their sort of economy at this particular point in time, and even with regards to the EU and Eurobond holders. I mean, the vast majority of Lebanon's loans are to Western financial institutions, and this has basically crippled the Lebanese economy. So when Hezbollah has to go in and factor how they're supposed to respond, and because, as you always said as well, they always have to consider the Lebanese people, because let's always remember, Hezbollah was created as a resistance movement against Israeli occupation of Lebanon. This is how Hezbollah came to be and came to exist, to end the occupation of Lebanon. So they are loyalists to the Lebanese people above everything else. And so they're not going to, although they're flirting with the idea in the same way that Israel is, just as Israel right now is in a dire economic situation and cannot escalate, the same thing applies for Lebanon. And the same thing applies for Iran. I mean, Iran is doing better now economically than it has in decades, because prior to, I think, the 2010s, especially now, it was a heavily sanctioned country that was unable to engage in international commerce and trade in order to be able to grow its economy, because it was essentially blacklisted. And this deteriorated the economy of Iran and obviously affected the civilian population quite drastically. And only now, for the first time, because of the fact that a third of the world's population is living under US sanctions, and now we're obviously seeing these sanctioned countries come together in order to formulate new forms of trade agreements. And now, because they're all sanctioned, they have actually, at this point, nothing to lose from helping one another. We've seen the inauguration of BRICS and all these other sort of institutions. Iran is now strategically placed in a situation where they actually have economic prosperity coming their way, and new economic trade and opportunities. And they've allied now with China and Russia, who have they're very powerful countries in their own right, who have essentially said, as Greg stated, Lavrov, that if anybody was to touch Iran, this would involve probably the BRICS alliance, and specifically China and Russia, who also engage in military practices and drills with Iran consistently. So Iran has too much going for it right now to risk it. And I think as well, bringing Iran into a greater war, the United States is perfectly aware of what that would mean globally. So I think what the point is, I mean, I would say complete desperation, because from a logical point of view, nobody will benefit from a full-scale war in this region. Nobody. At this point, not even the United States. Although there is provocation to undermine, and this is constantly what they try to do. They constantly try to undermine the civilian population, whether it's in Iran, whether it's in the governments within these countries, by sort of imposing, whether it's collective punishment in the form of sanctions or military operations, as we've seen in Lebanon. They try to find other ways to undermine these establishments and these governments without directly starting something. So I think, yeah. But having said all that, sometimes I don't trust Israel. I think that they're completely insane. I'm just being very honest. Like, I make all these evaluations, and then I have to remind myself that,
you can't weigh Israel or
Israel is no
judge
longer acting like a
Israel with
rational
any
actor.
logical.
Yeah,
you can't use
and by extension, you'd have to argue that in some ways the United States is no longer a rational actor, because this should have been ended a long time ago. And if Israel really wants to start a regional escalation, how far will the United States back them? So I just want to say before we end, because we got to post this, when it comes to Israel being an irrational actor, we do have some precedents from April. After the consulate was struck in Damascus, the United States said very publicly to the Iranian government in like official diplomatic language that we're not going to engage. And all they did was defensive strikes against Israel. That's it. So hopefully that's going to hold out going forward. And again, but the bottom line is the American people, like, as much as the war hawks in Congress, the neocons, the Lindsey Grahams want to call for war to bomb Iran, there's something you do have to take in consideration. Yeah, the United States has a bunch of oil reserves, but the war with Iran, which shut down the Strait of Hormuz, through which 1/5 of the world's oil passes through. And if you don't like your grocery prices right now, and you don't like your gas prices, and you don't like your global supply chain prices right now, Americans, you're really going to hate a war with Iran. So the military is not prepared. The civilian population, there's not enough manufactured consent for a war with Iran. I don't see it happening. So,
yeah.
But then again, we're rational adults. So,
exactly. How long have we been proven wrong because we're using logic and reason on this? Can I say one thing about Beirut for a second that a lot of people don't know? It's just a little caveat, historical caveat. The Beirut bombing of the barracks, the Marine barracks. I don't know if you guys are aware of the author Victor Ostrovsky. He wrote the book By Way of Deception. It was an expose piece book about the Mossad. It basically revealed all the secrets. It was one of the first books in American history to ever be officially banned, but it was overturned. So in that book, he talks about how the Israelis knew that the barracks was about to be bombed. That was one of the most shocking pieces of information that actually changed, at the time, American views of Israel, especially within military ranks in the United States. The Israelis knew that barracks was about to be bombed, and they purposefully did not warn the United States about it, because they were hoping that the United States would back Israel and get involved more heavily in Lebanon than what it did. So just a caveat, if you guys ever want to go check it out, By Way of Deception. I don't know if you can still buy a fresh print, but it's old, but check it out.
That was under Reagan, right?
When was that? Yeah, I believe so.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We never got involved.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, when that book came out, a lot of, especially Marines, particularly Marines, had a little beef with Israel after finding that out. It means that they allowed those Marines to die for the sake of their own interest. So,
yeah, well, crazy. There aren't other historical precedents for that. So, anyways, I think yes. Wait and see. The killing of Haniyeh won't change anything. Targeted assassinations are nothing new. They've been doing it forever. And obviously Hamas and Hezbollah are still around and fighting. In terms of regional escalations, I think Alina covered a lot of that pretty well. There's just too many interests and too many things at play, and a lack of preparedness for a regional war. So I think that's going to be our general consensus. with the caveat that we're rational humans and maybe not everybody else in the Israeli Knesset and military and intelligence apparatus are rational actors. So this is an ongoing developing story. And I don't expect a response for at least a few days, maybe a week, but I think they're going to happen. And I think you're going to get one more comment.
I just really want to say one thing as well about Israel right now. I mean, the fact that, okay, it does boggle the mind when you think about the fact that a political leader of the Palestinian people, especially under the fact as well, we've seen the Palestinian Unity government, the Beijing Declaration come through, was actually assassinated. I mean, imagine if the roles were reversed and it was Hamas or Hezbollah having killed and targeted a senior Israeli politician or basically Netanyahu. It would have been a complete outrage, but the Western establishments don't absolutely say anything. And then when you even, I think I even saw, I don't remember which, I don't remember the name. Oh, I think it was one of the White House spokesperson. I can't remember his name right now, but even with regards to the recent things that have been going on in the Knesset about the right to rape, and when questioned about these things, the U.S. administration is basically saying at one point when they asked, well, are these considered war crimes? And the representative of the White House says, well, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't say. It's becoming so atrocious as well. And I think, any sort of PR victory that this could bring automatically self-defeats even from that angle as well, as in the way that the West is approaching the assassination of a political leader at the same time that you've got the Knesset essentially arguing about rape and torture and what is legitimate and how they approach Palestinians. And it's become ubiquitous knowledge now. I just had to bring that up because I found that utterly vulgar and I just felt it was necessary to say.
Yeah, the hypocrisy is reaching whole new heights. Before we end, let's also recognize that Ismail Al Ghul of Al Jazeera was killed along with his cameraman in Gaza at Haniyeh's home as another middle finger to journalism. So that was obviously very intentional. So recognize him. Apparently he was a very well-respected journalist in Gaza. He refused to leave the north. He has gone through this conflict, putting his life in danger throughout all this. Well-respected in Gaza, and he was taken out along with his cameraman. So very brave journalist right there who are no longer with us to cover the atrocities in Gaza.
Yeah, because of course Israel uses Falcon View, and Falcon View is like Google Maps on steroids, and every building is numbered, and they know who belongs to every building. So there wasn't just like a whoopsie, we killed a journalist inside of Ismail Haniyeh's old house. So again, with all that said, Western values intensify. And thanks so much for listening. Those are our current analysis and conclusions, and we hope to see you next time. Cheers, y'all.